Well, hello and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, recruiters, and one actor as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. And today, LindaAnn, we're going to continue our discussion about the remote work world. We've talked a little bit about the leadership of it, and today we're going to talk about managing from afar, leadership practices for remote managers. So what have you discovered?
Well, I've discovered that Jeremy's awesome at providing information for these conversations.
Yes, he is. And we spent a lot of time about 3-4 years ago doing podcasts like this with the idea of helping people who were trying to transition into the remote workforce when COVID happened. So I'm interested to hear what Jeremy remembers.
Well, so he gave me a few articles, and they are posted on the summary document that's in the chat. But one of them was basically done, I believe, during the pandemic. And what they found was that there were 5 steps to really facilitating this process, and that was to maintain a culture of trust, to upgrade their communication tools. And I think that a lot of businesses can either upgrade or maybe audit their communication tools to make sure that they're having the right ones. Maybe they have too many in some cases after all of this. And then encouraging shared leadership, which I think we'll end up discussing in substance today. And then performing alignment audits to make sure that there is alignment with where people are focusing their time and effort. And then they said that these steps improve performance and engagement in the workforce. Now, one of the things I think that's important is to understand that one of the primary concerns of leaders of remote teams is that they are challenged because they have a fear of losing control and being able to maintain team motivation. And so I think that as we discuss the opportunities here for what's called collaborative or self-leadership, we might hit on some topics that can address how leaders can handle or quell that fear of loss of control. So when we look at, there were a couple of points. One said that 2 of the articles referenced the use of functional leadership style, and that's a leadership style that focuses on identifying and sharing the actions and behaviors that lead to effective leadership. So they understand what those elements of effective leadership are, and then they educate the entire team about that and expect them to function in performance of those behaviors, right? And those would be things like motivate the team to do great work, build trust and influence at all levels of the organization. So not only as a leader do you need to do that, but as a team member. Then communicate effectively. That's always challenging. But create a positive, collaborative, and inclusive work environment, which is really everybody's job, right? And then encourage the growth and development of team members. And so everybody's making the effort to facilitate their own growth and the growth of their team. So if you have a self-managed team, they should be able to execute at least some of those, and then that facilitates some open communication within the teams. It is different than the general hierarchical structure that we're typically used to. I think that that functional team leadership and self leadership probably works well in an asynchronous kind of environment. Yeah, that's where we are. And then some of the characteristics of self-managed teams are they're self-driven. So you have to have the right team members on that kind of a team. That they trust each other and that they are a one-for-all musketeers kind of environment. That that employee-driven decisions are the norm in that environment. So the employees make the decisions, and the leader would provide the guidance, right? And then they have high self-awareness, which is always important in any anybody who's executing leadership functions, you need to have a high level of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. So with that, I would like to see if we can start the conversation with some feedback on how people view the effectiveness and the realistic aspect of having self-led teams and having that functional leadership.
Well, we've already got some hands flying up, but before I get to those people, when you got to like shared leadership or shared management style, my alarm bells went off because I've been working a while in the corporate world, and especially mid-level managers having them share power where they don't hold all of the control is really difficult for some people.
It is, but you know what? And again, I think part of that could be a little bit generational. I know that when my daughter went to both in high school and in college, they had a lot of their work and projects and functioned in teams and did collaboration over Google Drive and all those kinds of things. And that's how she learned how to get work done. That was not the way I was educated, So I think that part of this can be facilitated in the education system so that it functions as people move through the work environment.
Good. Changing the world one student at a time. I like that. Thank you very much, LindaAnn. Dr. Martha, let's go to you.
Tom, you brought up an important point because especially for middle managers, they're usually stuck between a rock and a hard place where they get it from both sides, so it can be especially difficult. But LindaAnn brought up an important point of the generational differences, because for those of us who were not necessarily exposed to things like shared drives and a different type of working together, that may be a new concept to share the power, to relinquish some of the power, because I think in the end, realistically, it's going to be the manager who will be responsible for everything, even if the manager doesn't have necessarily the sole decision-making opportunity. So that's an important thing, because that ties into the point I was going to make, is that sometimes we look at what are the ideal components of making the situation work, but the reality is that we have a wide variety of people with wide variety of personalities and experiences and emotional baggage, if you will. So it's not just about having a good team. You have to also have the kind of leader who is able to lead virtual teams. If the person in charge has trust issues or control issues and can't imagine that people left to their own devices can be responsible and can do the work that they were supposed to be doing, then that will always come into play, no matter how good your team of people is. So there are a lot of moving components. So as much as we want to look at the ideal, what will make this work ideally, we have to work within the reality of humans getting together and trying to accomplish something. And oftentimes that's when a facilitator of some sorts would be helpful, because pretty much everybody could use a little bit of help in terms of training and getting over some of their experiences or personal hurdles, so that in the end, the team and the leader truly can come together in a way that benefits everybody, including the organization.
Thank you very much for that. And this podcast in itself is a great tool for leaders to look at when they want to advance and how to change things. And of course, always hire an IO psychologist because these people know what they're talking about. Thank you very much, Dr. Martha. Dr. Matt, let's go to you.
So, Tom, to your question about that concern around sharing the power, to me, that comes back to building trust in people's capabilities, in their potential, in their production. And when it's easy to say this not always easy to follow this, but in that middle manager role, trying to maintain your focus on the outcomes rather than on micromanaging the processes. This idea of how to, within remote work, there was a model that when I was working with a couple consultants, we were working with a client, and the framework that we came up with collectively, a collective design with the organization, was 4 T's and an I. So it was talk, trust, technology, team cohesion, and the I was invest in your people. So it's very similar to what LindaAnn was sharing in some of the research that Dr. Jeremy had provided. And with that, each one of those pieces, if you look at them as isolated, okay, first we're going to do this, then we're going to do that, you may see the needle move a little bit, but when you're addressing all of them collectively and you're saying this is a system, this is a process that as one changes, it's going to adapt and overflow to the other, maintaining that perspective of these are 4 or 5 areas that if we just keep attention to this, we can start to see some of the results. So with talking, that effective communication, it's fundamental. We sound kind of like a broken record. We talk about this so many months or so many episodes in a row, but really it is so fundamental that communication ensures clarity. It can build that trust. It can help keep teams aligned with organizational goals as well as expectations, and knowing when we are hitting the guardrail, when we are going in the right direction, or when we need to make adjustments. And there's a lot of studies that talk about the frequency or the transparency of that communication and how it can enhance that employee engagement and reduce feelings of isolation. That's a big thing when you have remote work. Even there, isolation or loneliness can be experienced in office settings. It's not just because you're remote, and it's become such a major issue that the U.S. Surgeon General back in 2019, I think right before the pandemic, had said loneliness is a major issue. We need to address this. And the impacts of that in the workplace, especially in those remote settings, this now becomes a larger piece of that conversation. And as organizations, as managers, regardless of that level, when you are maintaining that perspective of, okay, what does it look like to talk with our team, to have the right type of communication, be transparent when I can, but maybe not overwhelm when I don't need to, and trusting that we've hired this individual, this person, to do this particular job, treat them like an adult, and allow them to do that job without having to necessarily micromanage the process. And the technology, there's really cool research, especially over the last few years, as so many organizations did go remote. There's so much research around the use of collaborative tools, Slack, Zoom, Asana. They've been linked to better team coordination, better efficiency, which all that translates into more production, more effectiveness of the organization. So when you are in that manager or that organizational leader role and you're saying, okay, great, now how can I be more effective with this? Be mindful of the technology you use. And what I mean by that is not necessarily, great, there are a dozen resources, we're going to use all of them. Maybe not. Take a step back and say, do these work together? Because although you may have great intention to bring all these resources together, you can very easily overwhelm people when every app, every button is ding, boom, zing, all the noise is going off, constant interruption because the applications are not necessarily talking to themselves. So that use of technology, leveraging and integrating it in such a way that it actually provides support. And one of the best ways you can measure, does it provide support? Ask your people. We gave you this tool. Did it work? So I'm interested to hear what others I could keep going on about the other pieces that we came up with when we were working with that client, but I'm interested to hear from others on the panel. But that was just kind of my 2 cents that I wanted to throw in there.
Well, it's a great 2 cents. And before we move on, I'd love to ask you if you can share with us, working with that organization, what were some of the struggles and what were some of the successes?
Sure. I'm going to start with the successes. I like to start with positive stuff. Some of the successes, there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of sort of that shoulder dropping once it realized, okay, this doesn't have to be that complicated. This isn't that complex. We can build this. We don't have to follow a very rigid structure. We can build it on our own. And as the organization started to implement these pieces, some parts of their team saw positive responses, higher levels of engagement, lower levels of absenteeism within a matter of a couple of days and a couple of weeks. Other pieces took a little bit longer and we are still monitoring or assessing how effective those pieces were. Some of the challenges when you say talk to your people, trust your people, give them the right technology, there can very easily be a sense of paralysis by analysis. But what does talking mean? What does trusting mean? How can I let that go? This is the way I've operated for 20 years. So now before you can even get into that, maybe there's some individual coaching or some team coaching that goes on about that individual, that manager's development to get them to, or to help them build that habit and those behaviors that can then translate into supporting the team. So some of those challenges are, even though these are 4 or 5 pillars that are quote unquote starting points, sometimes they're not starting point. They're a navigational beacon that says, before we can even get to here, there are some underlying things that we want to address first. And really, who can help best identify that and understand that and map that out? IOs. So throwing a little plug in for us as well.
And that's number 2 so far. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Matt. I hope I get this right. Emmy, let's go to you. Welcome to Work Cookie.
Hello, thank you. Some really great stuff that's come out so far. So thank you for allowing me to contribute. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts that I'd heard about. One, from a manager's perspective or a leader's perspective, because both of those are, obviously different things. The desire to maintain control, I think it's already been mentioned that there needs to be some release of that control, right? And I think one of the areas we can really draw from in research is followership, and understanding those theories of followership and how to not only enhance our people's self-awareness, but self-management. I think that's really the critical function that we miss a lot, is the self-management element. How do you teach people to manage themselves in remote teams, or in distributed teams for that matter? You might have multiple locations and people even working from an office. When you can't see your people, the answer isn't to control them harder, it is to teach them to control themselves, right? And so how do we do that? I think that's requires the leader itself to also create a culture in which something I've termed culture of innovation. This culture of innovation really is the revamp culture, right? Innovation isn't just creating something new, it's also revision. It's also a revamp, right? Which can be minor, it can be major. And so creating a culture of innovation really allows you to do reflective or retrospective looks at what's going well and what's not going well with regular iterations. And when you implement that sort of a process to enhance your culture, it really continues to reinforce the ability to self-manage, and people then feel empowered to be able to self-manage. It's not just the leader who's important here, right? It's the follower. Without the follower, there is no leader. And so if the follower is not taught how to follow appropriately, that's really the miss on the leader's part, is that they're not enhancing their followers to follow well. And so that's a term that doesn't get spoken about very often, but is critically important. And I really love the mention of technology. I mean, at the end of the day, the team is a technology enhanced team, regardless of where the remote workers are. They need a hardware, they need appropriate internet connectivity, they need software, they need collaborative tools. And so making sure that's an intentional venture for the team, and saying, these are the ways in which we are going to solve these remote issues that people experience, instead of saying, oh, return to office, right? And so that is, I think, a critical function of leadership and development that can just be embedded within the team. Culture of innovation that is cyclically, iteratively building a greater and greater culture of collaboration, and ensuring that technology is enhancing that, instead of saying this doesn't work because the technology isn't there. We have an array of tools out there in the world, and making sure we vet, test, and iteratively implement the technologies that really create this culture are critical.
When we talk about remote workers, we're often, in our minds thinking about the employee who is, working from home, or they're in a different city or state. But as organizations expand around the world, this self-management model can really be effective in increasing productivity, right?
Absolutely. I think one of the beautiful things about expansion in remote world is you have a pool of candidates now that is so wide that you really can find the right people, not the people that fit to the best degree, but you can find the right people. And so in interview processes, this is a really critical thing, to make sure that with with the resource, that culture of innovation is something that they're going to be able to adhere to. I've worked for a remote first company before that became very clear when resources would be onboarded, whether they were going to fit within the remote culture or not. And, was their camera off all the time? Were they never showing up to meetings? Were they responding to meeting invites with irregularity? Just those elements that are really extra critical. I think in the global scheme, you can find all kinds of people that meet those check boxes so beautifully, and it's just an actual way to enhance this the team environment and the team culture of any organization.
Well, thank you very much for that, and thank you for being here today. Lee, let's go to you.
Well, first I want to say, Tom, I have empathy for you, because when I hear about your previous work situations and management and whatever else, I mean, I'm just, but the more we go through this, the more I kind of, I don't know, I kind of feel like maybe I'm a lazy worker and manager. I don't know, but I don't feel like I need to do everyone's job. And maybe that's the lazy way out. I don't know. And as a worker, I'd rather spend a little bit of time to do it once rather than doing it twice. To me, that just seems to make sense. But I know so many people that they're just, halfway do it and then they do it again and maybe again and maybe again. That's just too much work, and I don't know, maybe it's my focus on having some balance in my life that I don't want to do all that extra work. But, a lot of the way that I learned to lead in person actually translated to the remote world, really, because when I was in uniform, I mean, a lot of times you had large groups of people that were in different places and doing different jobs, sometimes very different jobs, and I don't even understand what you do, so I trust you to do it, and if you don't, I will know, because someone will tell me. And so, I learned early on that the tools and whatever else to do their jobs, and then I have to trust them to do it. And if they fail to do so, well, then we deal with that at that point. But I have to, give them the rope, as it were. And so, let them do their thing. And, and it's amazing what people will do. And actually, I think it was General Patton that said, tell people what to do, but not how to do it. And they will amaze you with their ingenuity. And it's so true. I mean, I have had people come up with stuff that I'm like, I would have never gotten that, but it worked. It's brilliant. And, I love that. I love that. I've learned so much stuff from people, and we talk about generational differences or whatever else. You know what? I love the different generations, because the different generations think of things that I would never have thought of. But it's a lot of it seems so obvious when you see it and you're like, wow, how did I miss that? And well, I mean, I'm looking through a different lens. And so it's so great to have those different groups. I mean, it's one of the things I love about the IO community, and the people that I've been able to interact with in the IO community from undergrad all the way up to, people more, people further along like I am. And so the way that they look at things in different stages of their careers, different generational things, whatever else, and you go, wow, you're dealing with stuff that was not a thing. Like LindaAnn said about the stuff. My kids, same thing. College, they're doing collaborative stuff. None of that was a thing when I was in college. I mean, I'm sure there was somebody with a pocket protector and tape on their glasses that was thinking about it, but it wasn't a thing back then. And I joke, my father's an engineer. He had a pocket protector forever. I love to tease him about it, but it's amazing. And what's interesting right now is what you were talking about with the self-leadership. I actually have kind of a blended team. I have what I consider my leadership team that they manage themselves. We're in pretty constant communication on chat, and then we meet when we have to meet, and otherwise I'll let them do their things, and I don't need to be involved. And then we have a sub team that one of my guys manages. It's a service desk team, so a little bit, a little bit different paradigm. They require more supervision just because of what they're doing. And so, and I'm in their chat, I'm seeing the chatter, but very rarely do I say anything in their chat unless I need to share some overarching information that's big, or to call out something great. Hey guys, you're doing great stuff. Otherwise I let their lead handle it and I don't have to be involved. I know what's going on, but I don't need to be involved with it. I go to they have a team meeting every week. I show up, but very rarely do I say anything because I don't need to. But it's because I trust their lead and I mentor him and I make sure he has the training to do his job. That means that I don't have to. But it does take that thing, I kind of look at it, I guess it's maybe the way I was raised. I'll trust you till you give me a reason not to. And I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt to start. Not fully, not completely. I mean, I'm not a sucker, but I'm gonna give you at least enough that, if you confirm, good, we're off to the races, great. And if not, then we'll adjust as we need to.
One of the best projects that I just love this project when I was teaching young actors in university was, we're coming up to the end of the year. You as a group have to take all of the little projects you've done over the year and come up with a 1-hour show. Go. And the only time I had to step in was usually about day 3 when they were ready to kill each other. But I learned so much about that group and the individuals when they were forced on their own to put together a show. So thank you very much for that lead. Nick, let's go to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, and I haven't been able to make it the last couple of weeks, so I apologize if I ask questions that have already been gone over. But when we're talking about kind of a self-directed, a self-leading team, I know we had a conversation about strategic alignment a month or so ago, and I think if you're in a remote team, you have to wonder: are we trying to put the old in-office model over top of the remote thing? Or do we need to come up with a whole new paradigm because work has shifted significantly enough that we need to look at it from a different angle, a different sort of process? But I think some of the things still, hold true. Do we have clear goals? Do we have clear, communication styles? What's an email? Thank you, buddy. We have, what's an email? What's a phone call? What's a Zoom call? Are we asynchronous? Are you supposed to be all these things set up at the same time? And so establishing those rules and establishing that communication goes a long way. I think we talk about the fear of releasing power, and if you're focused more on results than you are on credit, or more results than process, it does go a long way. Ultimately, somebody does have to be accountable, whether it's the whole team or an individual on that team. But again, like these are strategic and stylistic thoughts that you have to have at the very beginning in order to understand how you're going to function as a remote team, because I think there are many paths to remote success, as it were.
Yeah, there definitely is, talking with people who really understand remote work and have, remote only companies, they operate differently. They look at their team members and they figure it out. So thank you very much for that. Nick, Pete, let's go to you.
Hi, thanks. Just slightly different angle. Somebody brought up sort of Gen Z, millennials maybe, and what I think I'm observing, and I'd be really interested in others, take on this, is young people today entering the workforce are coming in with, I would say, a much more empathetic view of the world, view of their colleagues, than, frankly, my generation and earlier. And I think that it's certainly a double, at least, edged sword, right, in the world of work, in the world of the office and remote work and so forth. I think back to my last company. I had a ton of people we had hired literally just as the pandemic was starting, and we had to scramble like everybody else to go remote. A lot of those people were millennials or Gen Zers, fresh out of master's programs or college or whatever. Most of them managed to handle things. Like we set everybody up, and we gave everybody the technology they needed. We upgraded people's internet and so forth. But there were those who, had that, I really don't want to turn on my camera. I kind of want this time at home, some time at home to be interruption free, and it was an interesting balancing. I mean, I would consider myself a pretty empathetic person to begin with, but frankly, there were times where I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. And you need to recognize that you are part of a firm, you're part of a team, and it's not always, it can't always be you first. Just to be blunt about it. I don't think I said it that way, but nonetheless, so I'm interested, as part of the discussion, what others have observed or thinking about kind of the transition here in terms of how workers are viewing themselves, their colleagues, and so forth as we move forward post-pandemic and so forth.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Even if we're talking about remote workers, we're using things like Zoom, and there are some people that, as an acting coach, I can't get in front of the camera because they don't want to get in front of the camera. They don't want to see that image. And I'm seeing the same thing with a lot of remote workers where, if I'm communicating with you, I need to see you because I can pick up so many more signals about what's truly going on. So thank you for that, because it is a huge dilemma for some people. LindaAnn, back to you.
Well, first to Peter's point, I think that the younger generations are more empathetic because and I always go back to how people were parented, because that is a big factor in how they function as adults, right? And so a lot of the millennial and Gen Zs were brought up with more empathetic parenting. And the other thing that I think I see in those generations is that they have less fear in expressing themselves, giving their opinions, having the expectation to be considered, their voice being considered valuable. And I think that's also different than the previous generations, right? And that, again, it goes to how their point of view was valued in their upbringing. And that carries through. So those are some of the differences I see there. I think that something that's important, regardless of what model you're following, and I think it was Nick might have been talking about this, and because I emphasize strategic alignment so much, it's still, regardless of the model that you're using, it's still really important to express and clarify and reiterate over and over again what expectations are. And that's true for everyone. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're sitting on Nick's lap as a small child, and or if you're, Tom and I at our ages. It's always helpful when you understand what the ultimate expectation is, and this makes the process go far more smoothly. And then I'll make one other point, and that is to giving them the expectation and then leaving them alone. And I always called that structured chaos, where here's the fence, here's the parameters, right? Anything that you come up with in the middle to make it happen is probably okay. And so let's see what you got.
Oh, I love it when I'm working on projects and I get that much power. It's like, I just want you to tell me what you want it to look like at the end. Okay, I got that. If I have a problem, I'll check in with you. If not, just leave me alone. It'll be perfect. Thank you very much, LindaAnn. Rich, good to see you again. Let's go to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me again. One of the things we've been talking about, and that's been kind of a recurring theme here, and that's in the literature that LindaAnn shared with everybody, is this notion of a vision, right? Of having this visionary leadership, like a person who has what the end outcome is supposed to look like and can share that with clarity, right? So I've seen, and let's see, there's so many different models, right? There's the leadership challenge model, the 5 pieces of leadership challenge model. There's Cotter's change model. There's ADKAR. There's the Jim Collins good to great model. Any of these all have this vision part first, and that centralized person or leadership team that really have helped to guide everything else. So I think that's the first key there. But the other part of this is where so I worked for an association, a trade association, and we were a small but mighty team. Very, very few people in this organization. But what I loved about how the CEO operated was that he showed up to the meetings. He was very, very clear about what our objectives were, and he would ask for volunteers. So while we were in the office, we were kind of an office of introverts. So it's like everybody unite in your own little corners. So we all had, we would all kind of retreat back to where we were to do our separate components, but we were able to bring it all back together again. That translated really well when the pandemic happened. We all had to go remote, and we were still able to come together using Asana and Basecamp, depending on what the part of the business was that we were working on. But so leveraging some of that technology, but also coming together on Zoom, and having those meetings where we could share, and the meetings were facilitated where people they were not only there's no like voluntold, like we weren't voluntold to do anything. We actually wanted to do these components because they work to our strengths. And even when we thought maybe they didn't work to our strengths, we were coached to say, hey, look, you know how to do this, and this. And when we had that kind of self-efficacy because somebody believed in us to be able to do that type of thing, we were like, okay, yeah, we'll take that on and we'll give it a go, and we'll try that. So every time we would get together, we would reiterate what that vision was and where we were supposed to go with it. And people just voluntarily said, here's where we're at, here's where our successes are, here's where we were struggling, and it felt like a very collaborative and frankly, kind of safe place for us to even, share, hey, we've made these mistakes, but here's where we need to go to change it. So so having that strong vision, and then having people who, it's basically put the right people in the right seats and trust that they're gonna do the right thing.
I've got to ask you, Rich, what does it actually feel like personally to have a leader that believes in you and that goes, even when you like, oh, I don't know if I can, no, you can do this. I've personally never experienced that. So what does that feel like to you?
Well, I'm sorry you haven't experienced that, but
Yeah.
but I mean, I still keep in touch with that organization, right? But they allowed me to write in their magazine 3 times this year, which is super awesome. But you have a how do I put this? Like you really feel like you can actually do your job and do it well, and so that self-efficacy just can't be understated. That's what I wrote my final, when I was in school, my final paper was really about that in teams, building that self-confidence, to do what you need to do. So it's a great feeling.
Must be nice to go to work in the morning with a smile on your face.
Yeah.
I haven't always had that, but in the perfect world. Thank you very much, Rich. Dr. Matt, let's go to you.
So I want to I want to go back to Peter's comment for a second, and then it'll tie into what LindaAnn said and then what Rich said. So Peter's comment was about the cameras, and there was that was a great insight. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second and bring in something that may be a little controversial for our listeners. Regarding cameras on or off, my answer is going to be the IO answer. It depends. What is the individual situation? What is the individual meeting? What is the individual behavior or collective behaviors? And what are the whys behind that? What is the why behind the expectation of cameras on or off or whatever it may be? What is the why behind the behavior of the employee saying, I don't want the camera on? And also tying that into what is their performance. If this is impacting their performance, then yeah, there probably is a good time to have a conversation around that. But if their performance and their production and their engagement is there, and with the exception of the cameras off, you know what? What's the reason behind that? And really understanding what their experience is and what their preference is, and allowing that, creating that environment that says, I would love to have your camera on, but I want you to be able to show up how you feel is most comfortable for you on that day. I like to have the mindset or the perspective that everybody gives their best, even if that day their best is not the best. It is still the best that they can bring that day. And if that means that your camera's off because you know what, it's just not been one of those days and I really don't want to visually see people, totally fine. That's great. But encouraging and allowing that space. So for the manager who's out there listening, who's saying, no, what are you doing? Don't tell our employees that's okay. Again, I would encourage, have that conversation and have that conversation around the why. And then when LindaAnn, you were talking about different employees, different perspectives, being able to speak up and have their opinion shared, that's a great example of fostering psychological safety in organizations and in teams. And when managers, for the managers that are listening, I would encourage you to allow to look at creating those types of spaces that allow people to speak up and contribute. When people have that type of space or that culture, that environment, there's a different level of there are studies that show the stress is reduced, their engagement is higher, your retention could be stronger, all sorts of benefits. And maintaining that space that it's not required to speak up, but you are empowered to, you are welcome, creating that culture of inclusion and welcome and belonging. You are safe to be who you are and show up how you choose to show up, and that you are valued, not because your camera's on, but because of what you contribute to the team. And when you communicate that, and when you encourage that, when you foster that, that leads into that psychological safety, which leads into the more production and productive team, more engaged team. It's like one can lead into the other, and all of a sudden you have this operating group, this cohesive group that's like, how are we doing this? You know what? I don't know, but we're making it work. Well, there's the science behind how it works, and as long as you're implementing these little things, if the needle continues to move, you're going to see those benefits come back to you, to your team, and to your people.
You're absolutely right. I remember, meeting with people online. We had to discuss an issue, and one of the persons, there was no video because they were on a walk, because they knew that that's when their brain worked the best.
Right.
So, if you need to go for a walk while you're doing work cookie, please do. Thank you very much, Dr. Matt. Emmy, let's go back to you.
Thanks. Couple of things. One, when I was working at Fortune 50 company, we had an organization within the company called Bridge. And this organization was a bridge between generations. And so it allowed a space and a time and a place for us to really understand the differences between the generation and really learn from one another and be able to provide different value points. Technology was a huge one that was consistently brought up during that session and during those meetings. And so setting up spaces and places where you can have those conversations across generations will really help teams and help leaders themselves really kind of clear out some of the logs and the log jam that are happening within the organization or within the team, whether it's a micro, sub team or even larger organizations can do this. They looked at it from the perspective of the larger organization, which is really great for a company as large as they were. One of the other things I heard here really reminded me the word devil's advocate also can have just a really cool other cousin named cave people, constantly against virtually everything. And that's actually a really great way to reflect if you allow your cave people to poke holes in all of your ideas and how they can start doing things differently, right? And the cave people often get a bad rap. They're like, oh, they don't want to change. They never want to do things differently. Well, why is that, right? So allowing them to poke those holes and giving them the runway to be the cave person really actually can bring some value based on what those questions are and why they have aversion to whatever the change or the ask is. And that really feeds into the culture. I think that's another word I heard a couple of times that I just am a huge advocate for, is creating a culture within a team and making sure that the leader is the one that fosters that culture, regardless of what the desired culture is, right? It can be any culture. It's not to say copy and paste the culture of every other org. What do your people want the culture to be? What do you want the culture to be? And what does that look like in developing that? And self-managing teams, there are some frameworks out there that you can use to really to start dissecting that. Software development is where I've primarily worked in my career, and they have this cool buzzword, agile, and they actually do have some frameworks within there, though, that are intended for self-managing teams, and you can draw from that. It doesn't have to be software development. I've seen this work in HR teams and accounting teams and service-oriented product teams, so we can really expand those applications to a wide variety of teams. And just lastly, the models that are out there, this is actually what I'm working on for my doctoral project, is a remote and what I've called tech hybrid team model. And a tech hybrid means you're implementing a robotic or a modern innovation like AI in a formerly human function on your team. And we can very easily see that already. If you've ever been to a restaurant that has a robot that's delivered your food, you're looking at a tech hybrid team, right? And so how do we humanly implement these things? I mean, we're going to have to move in different directions with productivity, with the way our technology is moving. And the model itself is a human-centric or human ethics approach to how to do that. Because at the core, the human resources should be enhanced by the technology and not replaced by them. And so this collision with the remote world is just really a cool place and space to be right now, and seeing how some of these models and tools out there, if your leader knows a lot of tools that they're able to use, and they've got a big toolbox and a toolkit that they can go in and reach for the right tool, the right screwdriver, power drill, whatever it is that they need to be fixing the appropriate problem that's happening within the team or the larger organization. And Tom, I heard the acting thing. I was an actor in a former life, so that taught me some cool improv skills, and I just had to note that because I heard my ear pop up. I was like, oh, acting, lovely.
You should get together with Jeremy and I when we do some scenarios. And this is why you need to hire an IO psychologist, because we have all these questions, and you can find an IO psychologist who's on the cutting edge, who's actually looking at it and doing the research. So that's plug number 3. Thank you very much for that. Natasha, welcome back to Work Cookie. Let's go to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those of you who are in a different time zone. So there are a lot of great points that were made, and I believe that the point I'm going to jump on, I'm going to touch on points that LindaAnn, Dr. Matt, and I believe it was you, Peter, where we were talking about, this new generation being more empathetic. And I don't necessarily believe that it is just empathy. I believe that we are looking at this new generation by way of millennials and Gen Z are really looking at the workplace from a holistic standpoint and a realistic standpoint. And one of the, I believe his name, I don't remember who it was exactly who said that. I do remember, I see his face, but I can't remember his name. But he talked about millennials are trauma babies. From the time that millennials were born, it has always been trauma after trauma after trauma, be it 9/11. There has all the great, the recession of 2008. And so as a result, this generation has always been from a standpoint of seeing what has not worked ahead of them and having an opinion about what can be done better and about things not having to be done, you know, the way it's always been done, added to the fact that now we also have the use of the Google that a lot of people still do not use, in order to research information, in order to have a quick tutorial about different management styles, etc. And I think that, you know, when we think about that, working in a remote environment, we touched about topics of trust, trusting people to do what they were hired to do. I think we also have to think about it from a perspective of, I can understand how fun it might not be to sit in a business meeting and seeing, you know, black boxes, but that's where we talk about on the Zoom calls, but that's where we reference having team agreements in terms of having standards of what are the meetings that are important for people to have their cameras on, and what are the meetings where it's not necessarily important. I do not think that Zoom or working remotely has done any harm per se to the corporate world. It has expanded how we can work, how we can do our day-to-day. I believe that, and it also, we've expanded it in a way to meet employees where they are. There are a lot of, when we think about employees who are neurodivergent or are not extroverts, they're introverts, that don't appreciate the water cooler conversations when we're leaving the conference room back to our desk. I just want to get to my desk and do my work. And here is Natasha chatting me up about post-meeting comments, like the meeting ended, leave me alone, Natasha, go to lunch, leave me alone, go to your desk. And another aspect when we think about it more expansively, every single organization post the unraveling of George Floyd has put up a diversity, equity, inclusion statement. A lot of organizations have policies and statements about workplace culture. But there are a lot of employees or people from historically marginalized groups that will let you know working from home has partially shielded me to microaggressions and aggressions that I used to formerly experience in the workplace. The only difference is I no longer experience them in the workplace. I now experience them at home because they continue through Zoom. And sometimes the only form of humanity or decency or dignity that I have is the ability to have my camera off. This way I do not have to pretend or keep my composure professionally. I cannot really show how I feel, but when my camera is off, I can be me in the space of still being microaggressed or aggressed, period, virtually. And so I think that when we think about it in terms of managing staff remotely, I think the same way we had code of conducts for how we are to treat the physicality, the physical building, the spaces that we occupy as colleagues, it's the same way that our policies should expand to, and what are the expectations when working remotely? And then have micro policies within the different teams in terms of client meeting, we're all expected to be cameras on, or we follow the client's lead, or even if the client has their cameras off, we still have ours off. Team meeting, it's as you please. If you want to have it on, you can have it on. If you don't want to have it on, you don't want to have it on. And I think, again, someone mentioned it, it's about truly creating the environments where our staff are able to make decisions based on what is allowed, and do their work in a way that allows them to be the most productive. I'll share this really quickly and I'll close. I managed a team during COVID, and my thing was we all took walks during our team calls. our stand up. If you want to step out, let's go ahead, let's take a walk. That way we got our steps in, we got fresh air. It guaranteed that we stepped away from the desk, and by the time we're back, we were as productive as we could be. And it was something that my team enjoyed. So really understanding, having those guidelines allows people to be themselves within the confinements of what is allowed and without the micromanaging.
Yeah, I first of all, I'm sorry that you have to deal with those microaggressions. But since we're talking about remote teams, I want to ask you, when those do occur, in my mind, it's the responsibility of the leader to deal with those. Is it best to deal with them in the moment, or is it better to, after the meeting, contact the person who, has been displaying that behavior and have a conversation with them at that point?
I think that people who have experienced microaggressions you can experience microaggressions at all levels. And if there is a comfort and trust where you can safely approach the person who's done it, do so. And I say safely because I don't expect for that person to, lash out or whatnot, but there could be retaliation there. And if you feel like this is not someone that I can trust, where I can have this conversation and the behavior is improved, nothing else happens, then I say reach out to your manager if that's a safe place. If not, go to HR. And I think that oftentimes, it depends on the person, but I would say you have to use your best judgment, but know the different avenues that you have to have the conversation about the behavior that took place. And I think there was a point that I wanted to make earlier, when we talk about, the different, it goes back to the training of managers, training of leaders, as we talked about on previous segments, is that our managers and leaders need to be trained, not just on leading, but also leading remote environments, but also be trained on leading a multi-generational team, running a multi-generational organization. Because this is now corporate America. And very soon, millennials, Gen Z, and Gen A are going to be the entire most of corporate America. So if we don't get it now, in terms of, these are no longer things that we say, let's do as an ERG, let's do if you have extra time, let's do as a lunch and learn. No, this is the vitality of your organization. This is a vitality of your bottom line. We have to know what motivates, what deters every generation, what are their work preferences, and how we can mold that all together to create a success strategy for performance, for our bottom line, organizational objectives, whatever they may be.
Thank you. And that's, once again, why you hire an IO psychologist to navigate this path. Thank you very much, Nick. Let's go to you.
Yes, we always come back around to generations, and it makes my skin crawl because I am a millennial. I'm 40. I'm tired of hearing the title. It's one of those things that it's become more and more topic of conversation. And I think millennials, people still see us as preteens, and it's insanely frustrating. There's a wonderful book out there by Gene Twig called Generations, puts everybody in their historical context, from the silent generation to alphas or polars, or I forget the name she has for them. It's a fantastic read. her theory is that technology is what really starts to drive those divides between generations. Boomers had TV as they were growing up. Gen X had it every day in the house. Those sorts of sociological shifts that happen because of the technology. So yes, I will acknowledge that there's a difference, but if you acknowledge the difference without engaging it, it doesn't do anything. And the reality is we have everybody trying to work in this remote situation. And I don't care if you were, if you're 2 years from retirement or if you're fresh out of college, like we've got to figure out a way to make this work for the human side. And yes, is it going to be easier for somebody who had technology all throughout high school? Yes. Is it going to be even easier for somebody who has a smartphone in reach since they've been 16? Absolutely. And so those changes definitely do shape the way that work is going to have to work. Work is going to have to work. But at the same time, it's that idea that, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I think, if you have autonomy in your job, that's good no matter what age you are. And I think we can zoom in and out on different demographics. But I think yes, acknowledge the voices that are there, be it generationally, be it, all of the other sort of diversity things that we have that are coming to the forefront. All those voices should be heard. But I think at the end of the day, it's remembering it's a human voice. And we see a lot of this, with the empathy, with cameras on, cameras off. I know that there was an article written that said, sometimes it's a home invasion. Not everybody wants to share everything about themselves in a work call. Like my kid was in my lap. That's who I am. I'm a father, and I'm not, I'm not bashful about that. But there might be somebody who has, art on the wall that they don't realize sends a message or anything like that. So just to say, cameras on, cameras off is one thing. To Dr. Matt's point about, know the why. Are you trying to do it for control? Or are you trying to do it to make sure that somebody's actually there? Again, I think it's that micromanagement into the digital space to some degree. But I think, again, we're looking at having to maybe stop trying to duct tape the old paradigm of in office onto remote and really look at what are the things that make remote truly different, or even looking at the outcomes. What project are we trying to do? What product are we trying to make? And really just lining up everything from that main goal back to what the day-to-day looks like.
And we love the little visits that we get occasionally. So thank you very much for that. LindaAnn, over to you.
So a couple of points, and I want to go back to some of the things that Emmy said earlier, and about the elements of self-control and communication. And I think that it's very important for leaders, as they set up the structure for their remote team, to be very conscious of the difference between being busy and productive, right? Because so many of you have so many different instant messaging, project management, email, all those kinds of things. And you can spend your entire day responding and not do anything productive. And so it's very, very important to understand what you're giving them as a tool. How do you expect them to use it? What are the parameters? What is a reasonable response time? Because I tell people all the time, you don't owe everybody an instant response. It's okay to take a 24-hour period to think about, especially if they pose questions and so forth, to give a thoughtful answer. There've been lots of times I've been in situations where, my initial response to whatever someone had asked me in a meeting, what I thought I might respond, but I said, I'll let you know tomorrow, right? Give me a minute to think about it. And by the time I took my shower and drove home and all those kinds of things, which is my thinking times, I had a completely different answer in the morning. So it's important to give yourself that grace. The other thing too is, as far as like being on Zoom and how you administer that with your team and what your expectations are, please understand that if you can't sketch out an agenda within the next 5 minutes before your meeting, you do not probably need that meeting. And you owe them the courtesy of giving them the understanding of what you expect them to accomplish during any meeting, whether that's remote or in person. And let's see, and just in general, there's no what's different now, and we're talking about the generations, and Nick brought up important points, is that I guess I'm happy about this to some degree, is I don't have to really hear, well, we've always done it that way, right? So it worked. And I'm like, we've done it that way for 10 years and it's worked for us. That, well, it's not working now, right? But things have changed so much so fast, we don't hear that anymore. And so that's the state of how we're functioning. And one last point is to what Nick was saying. My daughter's 27. She's a cusp baby, right? She's born in 1997, and that's right on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z. What's important to understand, though, is it matters for them what generation raised them, because it makes a difference in how they perceive the technology and address all the things that are new in the environment. So people have certain expectations of how a Gen Z would do something, and my daughter is like, nah. Because I raised her, right? So I had a different expectation and process. So there's that complicates it even more. So yeah, just a couple points.
Well, those are good points, because I'm a cusp too, but I've always been referred to as a boomer by other people, and I'm like, I ain't a boomer. So thank you very much for that. Lee, over to you.
Thanks. I'll make it quick. I know we're at time here. The one last thing I would like to throw out, and we touch on it, throughout this series, is the management of expectations. Because it becomes even more crucial in a remote environment, because you don't have them. You can't always course correct immediately because you don't see it at that moment. Sometimes you don't see until the reaction to it or the result or whatever. So you really have to manage those expectations. And as far as a camera goes, that's a pretty big expectation, and you need to manage that. And and as we've said, if people don't want to turn a camera on, well, I mean, you might want to explore that, including your own reason for wanting the camera on. And but then you also have to put some guardrails. Okay, so if I'm not going to make you turn the camera on, what are my expectations? Well, how quickly do I expect you to answer something in the chat? How quickly do I expect you, if I ask a question verbally, how quickly do I expect you to come off mute and respond? Because if the whole point is I turn the camera on so I know you're sitting there, well, there are other ways to deal with that. I mean, I've got a guy that I constantly have to remind him that, when we're in a meeting, pay attention, because he's multitasking. He's working on something else. And it's something is important. It's got to be done. You can do that 15 minutes from now, unless it's an emergency. And if it's an emergency, drop it in the chat that, hey man, I gotta take care of this. Cool. That's great. I know. And you really have to put out those expectations. I was talking to one of my team today about expectations on work hours. Do I care when you work? Not really. I mean, I want you to not go beyond 40 hours in the week, because that's our requirement, 40 billable hours. Beyond that, I don't, I don't care when you do it. With the caveat that you are responsive to things that are going on. I mean, if you're expected to be at work during the day and nobody can get an answer from you from 8 to 5, okay, that's a little bit, there's something else going on there. We need to address that. And if you're going to work a different shift, okay, fine. We just need to communicate it. But if you need to go and, because I'm going to have to leave here in a few minutes to go, do something real quick. Well, I will let my team know, hey guys, I'm going to be out. I'll catch you when I get back. Something catches on fire, call me. But you have to manage that. You have to know what's going on. So that's what my team does. When they're going to have to step away, cool. I don't care. Just tell me. So that way I'm not throwing you a message going, why the heck isn't he answering? This is important. So that's what if you can't hold them responsible for things they don't know about. Or at least you shouldn't.
You could, but you really shouldn't. And if you're trying to navigate this whole process, talk to an IO. If you want to get comfortable and good on camera, talk to an actor. There you go. All right, LindaAnn, our time is up. We've gone late today, but it was a great conversation. So let's go back to you for any last thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation, and I think that I would like to hear what's really working for people in when they figure out, they test some of these ideas and processes, really what's working best and what's not working, even though we throw out these ideas, what's working, not working in given situations and so forth. And so next week, we will be addressing the culture aspect of it, and that's cultivating culture in nurturing team cohesion in remote settings. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of remote of all. So.
And there's always lots going on with CBOC in the organization. So visit cboc.com and find out all the great things like Lee's get together, the now student get togethers, and all of the helpful advice that's on the website. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, for your contribution today. And LindaAnn, if you want to count us out, we'll see everyone back here in 1 week's time.
Thank you, everyone. 3, 2, 1. See you next week.